Hi and welcome to another GCSE Geography Tube video. And today what we're going to be looking at is river processes. Now river processes encompasses erosion, transportation and deposition. If you see river processes in the exam, what that actually means is it's erosion, deposition and transportation. I remember this as TED. Okay. So rivers do more than just carry water. They actually shape the landscape through erosion, transportation and deposition by the rocks that they carry in the river. So rivers always start in the mountains and they always flow downhill, okay? And it's really important you remember that because rivers get their energy from gravity. Obviously, if something's flowing downhill, if something's going downhill, the energy is going to come from gravity. So that's where it's getting its energy from. Now, the steeper the gradient, obviously, the faster the flowing the river is. So, just a quick question to start off the session. Why do you think river water looks muddy or murky? How will we go? Well, it's because of the eroded material that the river is carrying. So what I mean by eroded material is the rocks that have been plucked from the sides of the river, on the base of the river, and it's carrying it within that river in the water. So, obviously, I'd like you to copy the spider diagram. Feel free to pause the clip if you like, and try and match up the right definition to the process. Okay, so these are your definitions, your meanings, and these are your processes here. So try and match them up. Okay, so hopefully you paused the clip by now. So the movement of material, this one here, is your transportation, obviously. Okay, so movement of material by your rivers, like stones, etc., is transportation. The wearing down of material, so for example, acting it like sandpaper, is erosion. And obviously laying down, dropping a material is deposition. Okay? And obviously the most erosion happens, the wearing away of the land, happens when the river's got most of its energy. So that is obviously going to be when the river is flowing the fastest and when it's got a steep gradient. When the river starts to even out towards the end as it goes to the sea, there's going to be more deposition that takes place. So the importance of these three river processes depends on the stage of the river. So we're going to talk about river erosion to begin with. Okay. So what you've got here is the 4 types of river erosion. Okay, and it wears away the riverbeds and banks and makes the bed load, which is the rocks that are carried in the river, smaller and smoother. Okay, and there's 4 different ones. So we've got hydraulic action. Now hydraulic action, the reason there's a arrow there is the sheer force of the water entering the cracks in the side of the riverbed. Okay, and obviously if the force of the water on the side of the riverbed here, it will obviously loosen the rock and increase the size of the cracks. So it's the sheer force of the water on the sides of the riverbed, and it forces the cracks open and weakens the rock. You've got abrasion next. Now abrasion is the rocks literally wearing away the riverbed like sandpaper. Okay, so the rocks, just imagine sandpaper and it's kind of smoothing out the riverbed. That's exactly what rocks are doing. So as they're transported in the river, they're actually wearing away this riverbed at the same time. The next one is attrition. Now attrition is when stones bash against each other. And what happens then is they become smoother and they become smaller. Okay, so the rocks start off quite large, quite jagged at the start of the river, and by the end of the river, they're quite a nice, smooth shape because they've been bashing against each other. That's called attrition. And then you've got corrosion. Now, corrosion, the reason why I put a little chemical reaction happening there is basically the rocks and stones carried in the river getting smaller because they are being chemically reacted by the natural acids in the water. The natural acids in the water then start wearing the rocks away. Okay, so you can remember that by corrosion is the chemical reaction there. So it's literally natural acidic water. Water's got natural acids in it, and that's wearing the rocks away there. So obviously these are definitions here, and you can feel free to copy those down. Now what I'd like you to do is, obviously it says to use to complete your worksheet here, but what I'd like you to do is to obviously copy these down, and then you could add a little diagrams like I've done on the last slide there. So next we've got river transportation, okay? And again, just like erosion, there's 4 types, okay? And you can see by this diagram here. So traction. Traction, as you can see here, is larger rocks being rolled along the riverbed. Now obviously the river is going to need lots of energy to be able to actually move these large rocks. So it needs lots and lots of energy for this to happen. Saltation is slightly smaller stones or rocks being bounced along the riverbed. Okay, so it's a slightly different here. These ones are being rolled along the riverbed, obviously because they're too heavy to be bounced. And the saltation is slightly smaller stones being bounced along the riverbed. And I suppose in both of these cases, you need quite a lot of energy. Now the next one is suspension. So this is literally the stones or rocks being suspended in the water. That's what makes the water look muggy and muddy. And then solution is a little bit like corrosion in terms of the natural acidic water is actually chemically dissolving the rocks, and solution is when the rocks are dissolved in water. Okay, so obviously these two here don't need a lot of energy to be able to be transported. Okay, so traction and saltation are your larger pieces of sediment, and suspension and solution is obviously smaller pieces of sediment or nothing at all. It's been dissolved. So methods of river erosion, obviously, transportation. So methods of river transport, you can see I've got it here. And this arrow, or the thickness of this arrow, shows the rate of flow needed. What I mean by that is for traction and saltation to occur, as I've just said before, the river needs so much more energy. And that means when the river has more energy, it travels faster. So for traction and saltation to happen, this normally happens in the middle course of the river, the middle stage of the river, where the river is running downwards and it has the most energy. So traction, again, as I just told you before, is when these heavy rocks and boulders are rolled along the riverbed. Saltation is small stones and pebbles bounced along the riverbed. Suspension is very small particles of sand or clay, normally suspended in the water. So they're not at the bottom, not at the top, they're literally suspended in the water. And then solution is obviously when water literally dissolves the rocks because it's slightly acidic and it just travels with the water. So these are your key words here. Now deposition is, as we just said before, when the river drops any eroded material, okay? And they always drop the heaviest bed load first. Now the reason rivers drop the heaviest bed load first is because obviously they run out of energy. The river needs lots of energy and it needs to be flowing very fast to be able to carry the heaviest bed load, okay? So that's always dropped first because obviously the river needs lots of energy and it needs to be flowing fast to be able to carry on carrying that heaviest bed load. The smaller the bed load, the further it can be transported. Okay, because the river, obviously, it will have less and less energy as it's transported downwards, as it starts to even out near the sea. So the heaviest bed load will always be deposited first because the river runs out of energy and doesn't have what you call the carrying capacity. So why do rivers slow and drop material? Well, the volume of water falls. So what I mean by that is the depth, the sheer depth of the water. If it's a greater volume, then obviously it can carry the heaviest bed load, it can carry more bed load. The amount of eroded material is increased. So obviously that is increased. So obviously it will drop it. If the water is shallower, it's the sheer depth, like the inside of a meander or a bend, which means that the water doesn't again have the carrying capacity to carry on carrying that material. And finally, when the river reaches its mouth, because by this stage the river has evened out, what that means is it hasn't got its energy from gravity anymore. If it's not flowing downwards, then obviously it's going to lose all that energy it had from gravity. So that's the main reason why when the river reaches its mouth, it deposits a lot of its load. So as you can see here from the photographs, there is a lot larger bed load at the start of the river. And you can see it's the start of the river by the V-shaped valley here. And you can see that they're large boulders, often jagged. It's because erosion hasn't occurred yet. So again, this river does not have the carrying capacity for the large bed load, for the large stones, because obviously it hasn't got a large volume and it hasn't got, it's not flowing very fast at all, is it? Because there's not much there. However, further down the river course, you can see that the bed load is easily transported because it's just a sheer depth of the water and it's fast flowing, so it can easily carry lots of sediment. So a quick quiz at the end. What does erosion mean? Okay, erosion means the wearing away of the land, like sandpaper. What is the erosion type called that involves a chemical reaction? Okay, that's corrosion. What transport type is when stones are carried when they are dissolved? This is called solution. Just as like you were going to dissolve something in a solution in science. What erosion type is when rocks and stone carried in the river wear away the riverbed like sandpaper? This is called abrasion. At what stage in the river would traction occur and why? Traction is the rolling of very large bed loads of very large rocks and stones, and it would occur at the start or middle of the river, obviously where it has the most energy. It's not going to occur at when the river evens out near the mouth. Why are the heaviest rocks deposited first? This is because the river loses its energy, and obviously it needs a lot of energy. It needs to be fast flowing to be able to carry these heaviest rocks. What transportation type is when stones and rocks are bounced along the riverbed? This is called saltation. Where does a river get its energy from? The river gets its energy from gravity because it's flowing downhill. What is the term used for stones carried in the river? This is called bed load. Okay, thank you very much. I hope you really enjoyed this session. Like and subscribe for more content. Thank you very much.